Hi there, and welcome to the version 18 walkthrough. Today, James Leckie, myself, will be walking you through the latest upgrade to Schoolbox, and I'm going to take you through some of the new features that we've developed. For those that have been paying attention, it's quite a bit of a shorter release cycle, this release. We are trying to obviously release more frequently and get updates to you more regularly. It's going to help with getting those updates and changes to you more quickly, but also we hope that these changes as they come through will not be as large as they have been on the 6-monthly cycle, so you'll have a bit less of an issue reviewing and upgrading your servers. I'm pleased to announce that every school is currently running version 17.5, so we had great success getting everyone upgraded before Christmas, and so we're in a great position now to start rolling out some new features and functionality for the new year, and we've got some exciting stuff to show you today. So let's get started. The first thing that we're going to be looking at today is the new feature tours. Now, the idea with this feature is that we will be expanding it over time, and that it will grow into a more I guess featureful feature over time, but we wanted to get out a quick demonstration of this technology in this release so that we could get some feedback and find out how it works and how well it goes within your school. So behind the scenes with this feature, we will be tracking user engagement to see if people are using it or whether they're not, and to try and get some understanding of how well this sort of goes, with the idea that we might be able to use this down the track. So quickly, for those that are not familiar with feature tours, the fundamental idea is that we want to introduce people to a feature within Schoolbox by giving them an in-app tour of the feature. So people don't have to go and look for the educational content or the instructional content on the feature. They can be guided through the system. And with this particular one, we've designed this for the dashboard. So when you first log in, this tour is designed to show to all staff on their first login to the system. I should note that this will not show for all of your existing staff, because we've designed it so that it only shows to new users. So people who haven't logged into the system before are going to see this, but everyone else won't see this. So don't be surprised if you don't see this yourself. It's perfectly expected that this will only show to new users in your system. But just going through, firstly, I'm welcome to the tour. I can either take the tour or obviously reject. If I'm happy with my knowledge of the area, I start by pressing take the tour. It's got back and next buttons, so I can go forwards and backwards through the dialogues, and it identifies different areas and highlights them and tells me a bit about each area on the screen. So as I click through, it gives me some information about what's going on in the navigation area, showing me the different components that make up the screen and explaining what they're all for. We obviously hope that this will help users become familiarized with the system quickly and understand how the system works, so that they can make the most use of it. And you can see this tour has quite a few steps. It's going through all of the different navigation elements, explaining what each of them are, and explaining what all the features are that you can find on the system. Obviously, we have some challenges in Schoolbox because not all schools have the same setup and configuration, and the tours are designed to adapt to that. So if you don't have a particular feature enabled, the tour steps will disappear that are relevant to that. So it can adapt to the particular user's configuration and display just what's relevant to them. As you can see, keep moving through, explaining notifications, and then finally explaining the whole dashboard as a whole. So great feature for introducing users to new areas within the system. We hope to expand this over time to cover many more features within Schoolbox so that new users can be introduced. We hope to add this for when we do a new release, so we can take people on tours of a new release and explain what's happening within the new release. Just really getting out to the users of Schoolbox, whether they be staff, students or parents, and communicating to them exactly what's changed, what they need to know about the system, how to best make use of the system, so to maximise their usage throughout the system. And look, longer term with this, we also see that this could be a feature that you as a school could potentially leverage as well. So if you wanted to build your own feature tours, that might be a possibility. So if you're interested in that, we'd love to hear your feedback. If you think that this would be a useful feature for you to actually deploy your own tours and give people some guides in line within the app as well. I'm thinking like perhaps a guide on how to build courses that is specific to how you want teachers to set up courses. Could be a great idea there, so you can make your own unique content in-app as well. With the new feature tours, there's a new tab added to the already existing large amount of tabs within the admin system, and we can click to feature tours. Of course, the whole feature tours system is customizable, so you can turn it on and off. And as we add more tours, you'll be able to configure which tours are on and off as well. So we expect that you'll have control. So some tours might not be ideal for you, and so you'll have the ability to turn those tours off if you don't want them. Obviously, we'd hope that you maximize these, because we do think they'll be a valuable feature to help your users make better use of the system. And so if you've got any feedback, if you don't think a tour is quite working and you want to turn it off, have a chat to us first and let us know if we can perhaps improve that tour so it makes more sense in your context. We'd love to hear that feedback as well. We will be also working on a preview tour feature, so you can get some looks at these tours and see how they work before you decide on whether you turn them on and off. At the moment, you'll have to obviously log in as a user who's affected and run through it yourself. But in the future, we'd hope to preview that as well. All right, so that's the new feature tours feature. Now I'm going to move on to another feature in the system, and this is our push from courses to classes feature. Now, traditionally, we've had the ability to push assessments to a class page from a course, but only if the assessment didn't already exist in the class. So if you had already imported a bunch of assessments into the class and then you went and updated the course, you had to go and delete the assessment from all the classes. And of course, this was a time-consuming workflow. It was frustrating for teachers when all they wanted to do was make a small change to the actual text. So under settings, there's a config setting to control this. Under LMS policy, you'll find a new setting called enable destructive course activity export. This is set to on at the moment. This will allow me to push items from the course into the class. And I should stress, this is a destructive action. It will overwrite what's in the class with what's in the course. And so we need to be aware that this is a destructive action. But let's just quickly go through how this process would work. Now, if I've got a course here and I want to perhaps modify this course and change one of the assessments within it, I might want to change the title of this assessment here, Essay Final Assessment. I'm able to set up make a change, change any of the tests, the tasks, maybe the rubric needs to change. Whatever changes I want to make, that's fine. I've update that item within the course. Now, traditionally, this is now marooned in my course, and obviously I need to go out to all my classes to make that change, and that would be time-consuming. But the new feature allows me to copy this activity into classes. Now, this button was here previously, but previously these options were grayed out, not allowing me to perform a destructive action because this already existed. But now when I tick this, it asks, are you sure you want to re-import to this class? Doing so will overwrite existing class assessment. And I should mention here that this won't just overwrite the assessment, but any submissions and grades that have been given on that assessment will also be destroyed. So it is obviously a destructive action. You do need to be aware that you are being destructive when you do this. But of course, it imports the dates that were on the assessment previously, and I can do this to all of the classes, confirming each one individually, because once again, it is destructive. We don't want people to do this flippantly. And once I've confirmed that, I can press export to classes. Okay. So pushing that, we now push that out, and that has now been pushed out to all of my class pages. Okay, so both those classes, Demo 2 and Demo 3, both now will be updated with this new assessment. So if I log in as the teacher who is teaching those assessments, the updated assessment will now be available on that class. So you can see there the word essay has been removed and it's been updated with the new title. So we have the ability now to force push those assessments out over to the class. Okay, so that's a good workflow improvement, especially at this time of year when you're importing a lot of courses, and of course, as they go out to the class, you're finding some, spelling mistakes, just some little errors in them, and you want to quickly update those. No one's submitted anything to them, so it's safe to do so. So you can now quickly and easily push those assessments out. Of course, the old workflow still exists, so you can still delete from the class and push out as well. So if you don't want the destructive action, you're worried about that, you can leave the old workflow in place as well. Okay, so next up we're going to move on to another feature, and probably this is one of my most exciting features, this idea of self-reflection within the pedagogy of Schoolbox has been something we've been really excited about building for a long time, and we really think that an LMS product like Schoolbox can assist and help achieve good teaching practice around collecting and encouraging students to self-reflect on their learning during the process of assessment. So to do a self-reflection exercise, we now, when we create an assessment, we have the ability to, and I'll just create a new due work here in this demo class, and we'll call this self-reflection and assignment. And I should note that the self-reflection process has been built into the existing submission workflow. So for a student, when they submit their work, they will be prompted to reflect on that work as they submit that work. So it has been coupled into the same process. Now, with this assessment, I'm able to put in a description, set all of my assessment options, and go through and set these. And I just realized I'm probably going to be better off using a rubric as well, and setting a few items for the rubric. And of course here we would have descriptors or levels or whatever we might have within this rubric. I'm just going to use a result set very quickly and fill in that set of levels just as a quick guide. So this has set up my assessment, but one of the new options here is the ability to self-reflect. By default, this is set to none, but I have 3 options available. So when going through my grading options, I can choose to allow the student to self-reflect, or self-reflect and self-assess. Now, the difference between these is that obviously none, there will be no self-reflection. Self-reflection on its own will allow the student to leave a comment and potentially fill in the rubric. Okay, so simply just select the areas of the rubric that they think they achieved to. With the self-reflect and self-assess option, it will allow the students to do those 2 options plus give themselves a grade. So it gives them the ability to additionally grade themselves. Now, we expect most people will most likely use the self-reflect option, but if you are perhaps not using rubrics, or you just want students to give themselves their own score, their own mark, you can just use the self-assess option as well, allowing students to go straight to the marking and mark themselves. So I'm going to use the self-reflection option here. I'm going to set a total mark, and that's my assessment. Let's create that. So once my assessment's created, I'm going to log in as a student and complete that assessment. So I'm just going to log in as Jana Reid. And as I go through the process as a student, the student will arrive at the class page and see that they have some work due, or they might go to their due work page, whichever way the student prefers to pick up the work that they need to complete. And the process of completing these are just the same as before with the student. The student will see the grading guide. They'll see that they haven't submitted anything yet, and they can start by creating a new submission. You'll note that there's now a new option when I'm creating a submission to say I have submitted my work in person and don't need to upload or use the editor. So in this particular case, we realize that in some cases, students are going to hand their work in physically. So they may have handed in the work directly to the teacher, and we didn't want that to prevent them from being able to use the self-reflection feature. There's no need for that to prevent them from doing that. You could have worked around it by having them type something into this text box to say I've submitted it in person, but this is just a shorthand for them to tick and say I've done this in person. Obviously, you'll need to check that they've done it in person, but it allows the student to continue on to the reflect on my work step without actually having to attach anything. Of course, if they do have the file to attach at this stage, they can attach it and submit that work to you. Once they get to the next step, they're presented with this page where they can self-reflect. So the student will be able to complete the rubric, selecting how well they believe they went on the rubric. Obviously, we'd encourage the use of descriptors with detailed information so that the student can accurately think about how they went on that particular descriptor. Did they meet the requirements of that descriptor? And think about how they actually delivered upon that. So then they can give you much more critical feedback. Of course, they've got the ability to leave a comment as well. Improve my spelling. And of course, you can see below the pop-up is coming up, saving my draft. So we've got that whole draft save technology going as well. So if they're partway through this and they lose the internet or their computer runs out of battery, they don't lose anything. We've captured it partial, and they can come back and restart this process at any time. So if they sort of get distracted and run away, they can come back and resume this at a later time. Once they click submit self-reflection, we move on to the final step. We're back at the details page. We can see that it hasn't yet been graded, but we can see that the student has submitted now, and they've attached a self-reflection to that submission. And this is a new feature as well. You can now see the rubric with each piece of history that goes on within this submission box. So if you are marking drafts or doing multiple feedbacks, you'll be able to see all of the rubrics that you have marked multiple times. So previously we only had one rubric per submission box. Now you can have multiple rubric marks per submission box. So quite a bit more complexity, but gives us much more detail about history, progression, what's happened over time, and also, of course, made room for this self-reflection feature where we're able to store the student's self-reflection mark as well. So now, as a teacher, I'm wanting to assess this work. So I'm going to log back in as the teacher. And we go back into demo class once again, and we're going to have a look at the student's submission here. Oops, wrong one. So this particular one, self-reflection and assignment, I'm going to view the status. And we can see Jana Reid has submitted on time, and that submission is waiting for me to review. So if I view and grade this submission, we can now see when we go to grade this assessment, and obviously because this student submitted in physically, they nominated that they didn't hand it in digitally. We don't have CAMI or anything here like we usually would if they'd submitted online. Of course, all of that would be there as well if they had. But in this particular case, we're just seeing the rubric, and we can see here with the student's little portrait photo what they graded themselves. So we can actually get an insight into how the student thought they achieved that result, and whether we agree or perhaps disagree with how well they assessed that. We've also got the ability to see the student's self-reflection, and of course once I'm done I can give them a mark and some feedback. So we give them some feedback. Obviously we can reflect on their reflection and give them some feedback on their reflection as well. Now we've got that added bit of conversation going on within that submission. So now we can really get some conversation going around how that was working. We can click publish and continue now, and of course that's given the mark back to the student, and we can go back and have a look and see exactly what the student's seeing. And now we can see it merged together. We can see that the student has, this is the mark they got, the student's reflection all merged together. If we look at the history that's developed, you'll see now that on that student's submission we have both a self-reflection and feedback provided by the teacher. And of course these are expandable, so we can see each of that feedback. Now if I ask the student to resubmit and give me another submission, I would then have the feedback attached to that new submission, and I'd be able to see how I'd graded that other submission as well. So this is great for drafting and things like that, where you might want to do the process a couple of times. So there's a lot more detail there in that history about what has gone on over time. Okay, that about wraps up self-reflection. We'll move on now to the next major feature for this release, which is participation. Now, in education, there's a lot of, I guess, demand for individualization and differentiation, and really crafting a learning experience that is unique for each individual, whether that be more advanced material, extensions, whatever the use case might be. There's a lot of demand for the ability for the learning management system to be able to really customize that experience to each student. Traditionally, Schoolbox has delivered assessments on a class level. So we've been delivering assessments for the whole class, and the whole class has been doing the same assessment, which is great for most of the cases, but there are a lot of edge cases which perhaps don't fit within that standard model, and we wanted to deliver a system that allowed us to give you further grained control over the delivery of those assessments. So I'm going to demonstrate this by going through a couple of different use cases. Now, I've got a final assessment here, and I know that I've got one particular student who's been granted an extension, and we would like to give that student that extension for this particular work. So I can modify this final assessment and go through the assessment details. Down the bottom, we have the ability to access a new area called Participation and Learning Plans. Expanding this out will show me a current list of all the students in the class, and I can see that currently no customizations have been applied to any of these students. So Schoolbox is working as it always has, which is to deliver the same assessment with the same information to the whole class. But we want to deliver this assessment a new delivery date for Matt. So I'm going to tick on Matt here, and I'm going to modify his participation. And I'm going to create a new plan. So this plan is going to be unique for Matt, and it's going to allow me to set a unique due date just for Matt. So I'm going to give him an extra 2 days to deliver that assessment. Now, when Matt and Matt's parents look at this assessment, they're going to see that new due date. So they're going to see specific due date just for Matt. All the other students have still got this work due on the same date. They've all got the exact same as everyone else. So there's no changes to anyone else. They're still going to hand it in exactly as before. But for Matt, he's going to have just a couple of extra days. Now, something else that I want to do with Matt, because I know one of the reasons he's getting the extension is that he's poor with time management. So I'm going to actually get Matt to do another activity that none of the other students are going to do. So this is a special activity just for Matt, not for other students, and it's going to be that he has to hand in a draft. So I'm going to ask Matt to submit a draft assessment. Or draft the final assessment. So all the other students, they're fine, they don't need to submit their draft to me, but Matt, he needs a little extra support, so he's going to submit the draft to me through this submission box. We'll set this to be due on the 18th, and so on and so on. I'm not going to set any grading on it, I'm just going to have one submission for it. When I get to participation, I'm going to do the inverse of what I did before. So rather than isolating Matt, I'm going to exclude everyone else in the class. So here, I'm going to exclude from assessment. So I'm actually going to remove these students so they don't see this assessment. So this one's only going to be visible to Matt. So now, Matt is the only student that has access to this particular assessment. Okay. Now, there's one more sort of use case that I sort of want to quickly demonstrate. Now, if, for example, I've got present a scene for Romeo and Juliet. Now, most of the kids are going to do this activity and present a 500-word, spoken report. But for some of the kids, I want to make this a little bit more challenging for them. So I'm going to customize this for some of the students. And so the task here is written up with 500 words, but I'm going to actually, for a few of my students, I'm going to identify some of the more gifted students, these white kids, and I'm going to create a new plan for them. And they're going to have to submit 1,000 words. So I'm going to adjust the text in here. And now they have a slightly different worded description that is unique to these particular students. These students are going to see the actual task description as something different than the other students. So you can really use this to customize the details of what you're asking students to do. So you can have individualized learning plans, you might change the style or what they need to do, what they need to submit, how they should do the assessment. All of that can be customized, and you can set the unique students that will have that customization. And I think this also demonstrates another aspect of this, is that I can actually do this for groups of students. So if you have some streams, you can create custom plans for each streams of students in your class. So you can have more difficult, easier, approachable tasks and stream them for groups of students. Of course, as a student, when I log in and I just realized that my final assessment, which I gave the extension to Matt on, I'm pretty sure I didn't save that, so I'll just give Matt that extension again. Be aware that you do need to save these changes. Don't make the mistake I just made. When you create a new plan, set that to the 15th. You do need to, once you've done that, you do need to click update to actually save that so that it will be visible. Now when I log in as Matt, and go and view this assessment now, or view this class, I'm actually going to see all of this customized specifically for Matt. So whether I'm looking at Matt's due work or his upcoming work or his class pages, Matt's going to see a unique course that's built specifically for him. So you can see Matt's final assessment is due on the 15th. You can see that he has this draft, the final assessment, due in 5 days. So we've really started to create a unique course outline for Matt. No other student is seeing the course like that. So we have been able to differentiate and set up a specific sequence of events for Matt to complete. So then you have that unique experience just for Matt, and he has had his course personalised for him. Okay, so there's a few other things that I just wanted to cover off. I don't really have the ability to demonstrate some of these things, but they're good to talk about, just to talk through some of the changes that are coming with this update. But before I move on, I just want to remind everyone, if you've got any questions, we will be doing Q&A at the end of this session. So as always, please submit your questions through our question area. I believe there's already many coming in, and Matt's been working with me to collate them all. And so at the end of this session, I will endeavour to answer all your questions. It's always the most exciting time of this Q&A, so it's great to have that at the end. But moving on, just to wrap up with a few last minute changes that are happening. Not all of these are available in my demo system even, and some of them are still to be merged in, but we do expect them to be there when we go live with this version. So firstly, our SAML system, the system we use for single sign-on into Schoolbox, is being upgraded in this release. For the most part, you don't need to worry too much about it. It will just work as it's always worked. But there is a few new features that you should be aware of. Firstly, we now have support for single logout. What that will mean is you'll be able to log out from your identity provider and have it log out from Schoolbox as well, or vice versa, log out from Schoolbox and have it log out of your identity provider. So that goes both ways, and you can configure how that works, whether it goes one way but not the other, or both ways. There's a whole range of configuration settings for configuring how single logout will work. In addition, with single logout, we now sign our SAML requests with a certificate. We'll automatically generate those certificates for you, and you won't need to worry too much about them. They will just be done automatically. So each Schoolbox instance will have its own unique certificate for signing, and that, of course, the public key will be shared via our metadata. So your identity provider will automatically pick up that information. So there's not a lot to know about SAML. It should just work, but just be aware SLO, a single logout service, has been added. Continuing on with our security stuff, we have added, and we actually did this in a master release, added CSRF protection across the board for Schoolbox. That really was on the back of some potential exploits being executed within Schoolbox that allowed malicious links to be sent to teachers that could potentially do things in the system. Now, we hadn't seen any active exploits, but we were concerned that it could be exploited. So we've added some additional protections there. And all of these security protections that we're rolling out and focusing on at the moment, we really are ramping up Schoolbox security. We're aware that many of the schools are concerned about the changes with privacy legislation and what that means. And obviously, we're taking a more proactive sort of stance on a lot of security aspects. So we're pushing hard forward with a lot of security enhancements, ramping up the security protections just to make sure that we are at the leading edge of any particular attacks that could be taken against Schoolbox. So we're always looking to push them out as quickly as possible. Unrelated, moving on to fixtures. One of the new features, and probably the most requested feature for sports fixtures, was the ability for coaches to be able to see the fixtures that they're coaching. So that's now been added. The dashboard component for fixtures will now show the fixtures that coaches are coaching, and be aware that that is actually going out in a master as well. So that will actually go out in a release very soon and be available. We just decided that was pretty critical to how the sports fixture system's working, and so without it, it's probably pretty hard for coaches to know what games they're working on. So we've rolled that out as part of a point release as well for those that are using the fixtures system. Next up, one of the other things that we've done is we noticed that managing the criteria or the capabilities for your rubrics at a course level was not straightforward. And one of the great features about our rubrics is the ability to show progression over time and manage your capabilities at a course level. So with the version 18 update, you'll now be able to manage your rubric criteria directly from the courses. So when you drop down here, you'll be able to manage the course's criteria. So you'll be able to go in and see what things this particular course is assessing. Now, and a lot of you know we're doing some work around that space as well. We're preparing for more curriculum mapping work, work with Atlas Rubicon, and some other things. So getting those course criteria in place is important so that we can continue our pathway and journey on to doing curriculum assessment and how that works with continuous reporting and so on. So look for the new course criteria button in there so that you can manage those criteria that are aligned to that course. Finally, one of the bugbears that a lot of people have had over the years is when you import into classes and you search for classes here, it brings up not just your current classes, but all your historical classes. So you know your class codes, and you type in your class codes, and you get not just this year's, but last year's and the year before's class codes. We'll be fixing that very shortly, so expect that in the next update as well, so that you won't see those historical classes turning up in there. So that wraps it up for me and what's going to be available in version 18. Look, with the great success of 17.5 and how quickly we were getting people to roll over, we do hope we can replicate that success and really get these features out into the classroom. We think teachers are really going to love these new features for the start of the year. Self-reflection, individualization and differentiation. It's going to be so important for this year for teachers to have access to these. So we do really want to get these out as quickly as possible. So in terms of our timelines, we're going to be rolling this out to your development servers this week. So we plan to do a build later in the week and start rolling this out to your development servers either this week or early next week. Following that, we expect to have around a 2 to 3 week period for testing, feedback, making any improvements and changes that we need to make during that time. And then we'll be looking to go gold practically probably the end of the month, early March. And from there, we're looking to do a fairly fast-paced rollout and try to get as many schools converted. So obviously, we'll get the email out to you sometime early March to book in your rollover. We don't expect this rollover to be very big. There's not a lot of changes to the database. There's only a few new features. So in terms of downtime, you know, for this upgrade, we're thinking 15, 20 minutes. It's not going to be a big one. So it should be a fairly straightforward rollout. There's nothing that really needs to be done on your end or on our end to make this rollout go easily. It should be just a straightforward upgrade. So we hope to get everyone upgraded over the next 2 months or so and get these features out. So now let's move on to some Q&A and let's have a look at some of the questions that have come up while we've been walking through. So firstly, I've got obviously a reminder from Sam. So just a note that Sam's wanted me to inform everyone, for those that don't know, Sam's our sysadmin here. He would like us to remind everyone that HTTPS everywhere is a thing, and it will be coming, and we expect that by July we will have everyone converted to HTTPS everywhere within Schoolbox. Once again, it's that security stance. We're not really prepared to have any of our communication unsecured anymore. Also, Chrome will be marking sites that don't have HTTPS as unsecure, so you will not be afforded protection. In fact, you can see that in my browser now saying not secure. So we expect that by July everyone will have converted. If you have any questions about that, please get in touch with our support desk and let them know when you want to convert to HTTPS. It's a really painless process these days. We just flick a switch and it happens. We can maintain your security certificates for you. We do everything for you, so it's all automated. The only thing you need to worry about is the content that is embedded inside your Schoolbox that is not secure. So if you've got a lot of content that's not secure, that's embedded in Schoolbox, you're going to get warnings, of course, but you'll need to start working on getting all of that content converted to HTTPS. We've already done a lot of the groundwork on that. A lot of our tools have been embedding secure content now for a long time, so we hope there's not much insecure content embedded in Schoolbox. But if you're aware of it, if you know about it, have a look around, start looking at whether you can convert it, and of course, get in touch with us before July, because by July we're just going to be ringing you and getting you converted. But we hope to get you converted before then. I know a lot of schools have already been converted. It's certainly at the moment it's helping with Cami. For those using the audio embed features in Cami, they only work in Chrome when you've got a secure connection. So Chrome's already shut down the ability to use the microphone without secure connections. So for those that are having trouble with Cami audio, you do need to go to secure everywhere already to help get that working. So just be aware that having HTTPS everywhere is a good thing, and I please encourage everyone to get on board with that. Feature tours. So I've got a few questions here. First, Blake Curran, do feature tours run for parents? So currently the feature tour, we've only got one feature tour. I know it sounds a little disappointing, but we just wanted to test out the functionality. We do expect that to expand over many more functionalities over coming releases. But just initially, we've got one, and it's just for staff. So the impact is contained just to, and it's not to all staff either. It's just new staff. But ultimately, the plan is to expand that and run it across all users. So we do expect to build ones for parents and for students, specifically for the things that they might need to know. So yeah, we do see them as more challenging, but we do think that as we go, we will add ones for parents as well. Blake also asks, the feature tools would be great for all staff to use as a refresher each semester. So yeah, we do remember when a user has done a tour, and we don't let them do it again at the moment. But we probably could add the ability for you to reset that tour and perhaps say, I want everyone to do this again. It might be a bit frustrating to your users, but it could also be a good refresher. So if you call support at the moment, we can actually, in the back end, turn it on for all your users. So if you say, well, my users have been logging in for the last few months, but I don't think they really understand how the dashboard works, it might be a great opportunity for us just to flush that status that says don't do this tour, and just send it out to everyone and have everyone do that tour. So if you're interested in us doing that, just contact support and we'll get that tour set up to run for everyone for you. That's not a problem. Okay, destructive courses. So the ability to push activities from your course to your class. Richard Stebbing adds, can we add a note to the destructive push warning that grades will be deleted? Yep, it was actually one of my notes when I did the script for the webinar that warning dialogue probably needs to be improved to actually make clear that grades and submissions will be destroyed in that push. So, yep, it's a great idea, Richard. We do plan to go over some of those messages and just make sure that they really do make clear what is actually going to happen when you push that button, because it is quite dangerous, and we are concerned about, you know, a teacher accidentally deleting all of their grades, and all they wanted to do was fix a spelling mistake. So yeah, we will try and make that text a bit more clear about what potential damage is going to happen. Next question from Brad Owens. Can you only force push to classes that are linked to a unit? Yes, of course. You can only push to the classes that have been linked. They're the ones that have the relationship with that course. So it only makes sense to push to them. If you're wanting to put into a new area, the course, you can just do an import. So import that class, and of course you don't need to push at that stage because it'll be a fresh cut. And so any changes you've made before that time will come across into that new area. So the force push is really only when you have done the import already into the class and you need to make a change following the import. If you want to put the information, the assessments into a new area, just use the import feature. Next question, Tim Warren asks, how does push to course work with the project activity type? Okay, so currently it's not possible to, it's not possible to push a project it's not possible to push the individual assessments within a project, sorry. You can push the whole project, and that will obviously remove the project and all the things within it, but you can't go into the project and push the individual things within the project. So unfortunately, the only thing you can push is the project as a whole. So just be aware of that, that if you've got things inside projects, the only way to push is the whole project activity, not the items inside it. Obviously not ideal, but just the way it is at the moment is the project comes as a whole package, and so it has to be pushed as a whole package. You can't push individual parts of it. Okay, so Tim also asks, is due work the only activity type that pushes to the parent view on calendar? How can parents only see the attached assessment notifications such as a PDF? All the activity types do go to the calendar now. In fact, there was a big outrage when we added tasks to the calendar, and that's one of the things we're looking at perhaps tuning back a bit. But currently quizzes, tasks, projects and due work all appear in the calendar, and all of the information attached to those assessments can be seen in the calendar. So if you create a task and set a due date for next week and attach a PDF to that, that will appear in the calendar just the same as a due work would as well. Traditionally, due work was the only thing that appeared in the calendar, due work and quizzes, but we added tasks about 3-4 releases ago now, so tasks appear as well in the calendar. So practically everything will appear, every assessment item that you create within a course will ultimately appear in the calendar. Okay, next up, we've got a few questions on the self-reflection feature. So Blake Curran asks, do the self-assessment reflections sit in grades for staff to check for years to come? So yes, they will always be there. So as always, all the mark data, all the submissions, all the reflections now as well will remain attached to that assessment forever after. And for those that have been with Schoolbox for a few years, you know about the rollover process where you archive all those class pages and put them to the side. Now, the reason we archive and roll over those class pages is because they do contain all of those assessments, reflections, and marks from the students. So it's important to do that rollover, archive those classes so that we can keep that information. And of course, when you're looking, if you're a teacher in the system and you're looking for past assessment data, maybe perhaps by a particular student, you can always, when you look for a student, and you look up a particular person, when you go to the grades page, you can, of course, go through the history of all of the assessments that have been completed over time and go back to previous years. When you go back to those previous years, it'll show you the subjects the student was involved in those years. And then when you drill down, you'll be able to see the assessments, and of course, we'll end up being able to see the reflections and everything else that that student has done in that activity. Okay. Okay, so Kelly asks, is the submitted in person option available on all due work, even when self-reflection isn't being used? Yes, that option, we did and ah about this for a while, whether we would allow submitted in person option available on all due work. We've decided that it's a good feature. The reason we were and ahhing is just because we didn't know whether students may just tick the box and not submit their work, and we might be back where we started from without really a way to track the student's submission. But we decided that students are responsible enough and teachers will follow up on them, and that will eventually be used properly. So we are thinking that we will have that submit in person option available for all due work. So that'll allow the student to actually say, I've submitted this work. The nice thing about that as well is that we had for a long time an issue with our notifications, and what would happen is that teacher would set the due date to tomorrow, for example, and the students would submit, some would submit online, some would submit offline, and Schoolbox had no idea that they'd submitted offline. And so we would then go and send them a notification saying, hang on a sec, you haven't submitted your work, it's now overdue. And then we'd go send a message to their parents and tell their parents that they hadn't handed in their work, but of course they had, but they'd done it physically. Now with this new checkbox, the students can actually say, well, yes, I have done this. You don't need to notify me that it's overdue because I actually did submit it offline. So it gives the students a bit more control over saying they submitted that work. Of course, the teachers have got the ability to do that as well. We added in the last release the mark submitted button. So teachers can also acknowledge a student's submission, and now students can also acknowledge their submission even if it wasn't done online. All right, let's move on. So we're moving to custom participation, and a few questions in custom participation. Josh asks, is there a select all option when excluding students from assessments? Some of our classes can get quite large. Josh, yes, that's on the plan to have a submit all button. I think the team says that they might be able to squeeze it in. I think they hate when I commit them to things, but I would like to think that we'd have a checkbox to select all at the top of the list, so you can apply that and easily, quickly put a plan on for lots of students or exclude lots of students. So yeah, I think that will be definitely something we would do. And of course, if you find things like that, Josh, that you think we could improve or would make life easier, always let us know in the help forums. Chuck us a line so that we can improve those features, especially during that beta period, because we do want to make small little tweaks like that are great to just make the feature just that bit nicer for teachers to use. So if you get that feedback through, we're happy to take it on board. Okay, David Howard asks, can you create a custom plan with different attachments for different students? So currently, no. We did plan for more customization on the assessment, but at the moment, we had to sort of cut our losses. We wanted to get the feature out. It already does quite a lot, but it doesn't give you the full control over every aspect. But it can, of course, I guess, almost implement that functionality by creating 2 assessment tasks and excluding the students from each of those assessment tasks. So if you wanted to have different attachments or a different rubric, you could create that special assessment, exclude all the other students and give it to 1 or 2 students, and then create another assessment and exclude all the opposite students from it. So if you wanted to have more detailed personalization, you can still do that just by utilizing the exclusion functionality rather than the plan functionality. But yeah, we do hope to extend what you can customize in the plan in the future. And attachments is certainly one of the things that I think would be useful to be able to customize at a plan level. Okay, all right, so I've got a few questions on the roadmap. Where are certain things at? So let's go through a few of these. So David Howard asks, an update on badges. Where's badges at? So badges is obviously a big project. There's a lot to it. It's up there on our list. It's probably, I think, in the top 4, top 5 at the moment of things to do. But it is a big project, so it probably won't be something that can be done in a single release. We will be working on that though, and looking to deliver that over the year. It's certainly definitely on our roadmap and one of our key features for this this year. In fact, it's probably the most important feature for this year for us. So it will be coming, and I know I've been saying that now for a year. And I'm sure David will remind me, but yes, we are still working on it. We do still plan to do it. Nothing's changed, but it's just about prioritization and getting the time. We did find that customer participation and self-reflection were our most voted features in our forum by a long margin, and so we just did want to prioritize those because those were the features that people were asking for. Badges is up there, and it's up in the top list as well, so it'll be up next after we've delivered these. Tarek asks, is there an update on Undelete? Sure. So Undelete has been proving more difficult than it looks. The reason for that is that everything in Schoolbox is interconnected, and when you delete something, it may or may not delete the things it's connected to, and when you have to undelete it, you also may have to undelete the things it's connected to. And these relationships about what is deleted and not deleted in the web of interconnected objects within Schoolbox has proven very difficult for us to get a clear definition on. So we have a basic idea of what we're doing. We've had some attempts at it, but it's on the back burner at the moment while we work out the infrastructure for how do we actually track what is deleted and what should be undeleted when you do that. Just to give you a quick example, deleting a folder, for example. A folder has groups, it has homepage components, it has files, it has assessments, it has student submissions, it has marks. All of those are attached to the folder. So when we delete that folder, what of that do we delete? And when we undelete that folder, what of that do we need to undelete? So you can see how connected something as simple as undeleting a folder could be when there's so many things that could be touched in the process of undeleting that. So we're still working on that. So moving on to the next question. Jan Dudley asks, update on ACT TQI accreditation. I don't know if I have an update on that. I can tell you that we got NISA accreditation recently, and we do hope to work with other states and territories to get accreditation where applicable. We're hoping that the work we did for NISA will make it fairly straightforward, but I don't have a specific update on that at the moment. I can certainly follow that up for you and see how that's going. Karen asks, can assessment grades be separated out to be linked to the criteria in the mark book instead of combined into one grade? If one piece of work is assessed against 3 criteria, can they be seen separately in the mark book? Couple of parts to that question, Karen, and I'm aware of the Tasmanian assessment system and how that works, and it's a similar system in Queensland as well, in fact, and the way that criteria are marked. We are doing several projects to assist with that, and they're all on the roadmap this year. Firstly, we're looking at a mark sheet marking system. So rather than a rubric, we're looking at the option to mark per criteria. So select a grading system, A to E, and then select a series of criteria, and you'll be able to mark those criteria by letters. So that's one option. we're looking at. And another part of that question, we're also looking at some new reports that will look at the data at different dimensions from assessment by student. We're going to have a look at doing assessment criteria assessment by student. So you'll be able to see what results students got inside their rubrics on a specially designed criteria markbook that will use criteria as its columns rather than assessments. So expect to see that this year as well. Both of those are fairly important to start to look at how the markbook looks when you start to do criteria-based assessment, which is certainly an important thing. And all of that is tying together, by the way, in our initiative and challenge around how we improve continuous reporting and how we capture that data better. So there's a whole range of components to that and little pieces that we'll be putting together over the next 12 months to improve continuous reporting in Schoolbox. Okay, next up, James Dodd asks, is there a way in Schoolbox for a staff member to send a one-to-one notification to a parent or student? Yes, there is. Super users can do this on the modify screen. So you can do that directly within Schoolbox. If they're logged in, you can send a message. But primarily, we don't see, I guess, Schoolbox as a messaging system per se. So we don't plan to compete with Slack or instant messenger programs or anything like that. Teams from Microsoft. We see those chat programs and the messaging functionality of those as sort of separate to, I guess, our mission. We're really focused on the aspects of assessment and school communication, and not so much around the, I guess, one-to-one communication that goes on either via email or instant messenger or things like that. So we do see them as slightly outside of our goal and our setting. But do expect to see some improvements to our news module over the next few months. We do plan to start work on enhancements to the news and make it more flexible this year as well. And that would allow you to do some more interesting things with communication. Okay, one last question. Sam Rozek, can self-assessment be selected when you create a learning plan for individual students? Yes. It's basically, can the two features be worked together? Yes, of course they can. They are all independent, but I think, are you asking? I think you might be asking, can you create the marking scheme independent of the participation? And basically, the short answer is no. Currently, when you're creating a plan, you're only able to configure the dates and the description of the task. You cannot configure the grading scheme, the rubric, or whether it's self-reflection or how many submissions they can submit per student. All of that currently is not individualized. So you're limited to just rewording the plan and setting new dates. So marking, because I mean, if you think about it in terms of the markbook, we need to have something that's consistent about the assessment. That means that it all lines up in the markbook. If students are all being marked to a different thing in the same assessment column, none of the marks are going to make sense in context for those students. So in that case, what I would suggest is creating a separate assessment with its own grading scheme and rubric for that particular student, and then excluding all the other students. So if you do need to change the grading scheme, the rubric, or whether it's self-reflection or self-assessable, do that with its own standalone assessment rather than trying to do it with a plan. So yeah, I think that wraps up all of our questions. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating in today. I hope you're as excited as I am about all the new features. I certainly think that these are going to be a great leap forward for your teachers in terms of what they're doing with Schoolbox today. I really hope to hear your feedback from your teachers about how they're actually going to start using this and what they think they'll do with these. As always in Schoolbox, for us, the most fun is seeing how people take our ideas and implement them in the classroom. So we're really excited about what you do with these features. So get on the forums and give us some feedback. You'll see that in the top features, self-reflection and custom participation are the two big ones. I should also note that with self-reflection, the forum post for that is called Self and Peer Reflection and peer assessment, and we do see self-reflection as the first step and peer assessment as the second step. So just because we've delivered self-reflection doesn't mean we're not going to do peer assessment, and we do see them as stepping stones, and we do expect that that will be expanded to peer assessment down the track as well. But yeah, by all means, get in on those forums, chat to us about what you think about those features, how they're working. We're looking to get feedback during this next few weeks to see if we can fine-tune everything before we go live. So thanks a lot, everyone, for coming along, participating and listening to me go on. It's great to have you all here, and I'll speak to you all soon.